In this podcast episode, Daniel Priestley, an Australian entrepreneur and economic commentator, dissects the challenges facing Britain's economy today, focusing especially on how governmental policies, taxation, and cultural mindset are harming entrepreneurship and wealth creation. Drawing from his extensive experience running startups and working with thousands of entrepreneurs globally, Daniel offers a comprehensive critique of the current British economic environment, explaining why it is driving millionaires away and impairing the country's entrepreneurial spirit. Daniel begins by asserting that entrepreneurship has never been easier or more accessible than it is today. Technological advances, remote working possibilities accelerated by the pandemic, and access to global markets create an unprecedented opportunity for individuals to start and scale businesses rapidly. Yet paradoxically, Britain is losing wealthy entrepreneurs and millionaires at an alarming rate, a trend almost unique worldwide. Much of this is attributed to how tax policies and regulations have been structured, making it difficult for entrepreneurs to operate profitably or remain incentivized to stay in the UK. The importance of a viable, win-able economic game is fundamental. If entrepreneurs perceive that taking risks will result in disabling tax burdens or regulatory barriers, they simply relocate to more welcoming environments. With the advent of cloud-based business models and digital infrastructure development during COVID lockdowns, entrepreneurs can now run businesses from anywhere, whether that's Dubai, the USA, Thailand, or Italy. London, despite its cultural vibrancy and unique urban appeal, cannot compete if crime rates and heavy taxation persist, thereby eroding its attractiveness as a global entrepreneurial hub. Daniel highlights changes like the removal of non-domicile, non-dom tax statuses as a major factor driving wealth out of the UK. Wealthy international entrepreneurs who might have once used London as a global base now face taxation on worldwide income and inheritance taxes so steep that holding wealth or passing it on imperils the survival of family businesses. Such policies, coupled with stringent tax rates on income and business earnings, fundamentally alter the cost-benefit calculus for high-net-worth individuals who can easily choose other jurisdictions. A major theme of the discussion is the widespread misconception about how much tax the wealthy pay. Daniel challenges populist narratives that label the top 1% as exploitative tax dodgers. Instead, he reveals that although the top 1% earn 14% of the UK's income, they pay about 30% of all income tax, disproportionately high relative to their share of earnings. This includes other revenue streams like corporation tax and stamp duty. Consequently, this group shoulders a far heavier tax burden, particularly because of progressive tax rates that escalate sharply beyond certain income thresholds. Daniel explains that while middle-income Britons benefit from historically low tax rates and thresholds, those earning above £100,000 face marginal tax rates exceeding 60% on extra income in certain bands, and additional layers of taxation when extracting income from corporate profits or paying inheritance taxes. This creates a perverse disincentive to grow personal wealth or reinvest in businesses locally. Far from being fair share, such taxation breeds capital flight, reduces entrepreneurial drive, and lowers overall economic productivity. He also touches on the cultural difference between Britain and places like the United States, where wealthy individuals and entrepreneurs are often admired and their success celebrated. In Britain, suspicion of wealth partly originates from a historical class system centered on inherited aristocracy, even though most British millionaires today are self-made, not inheritors of family wealth. Recognizing this misconception is crucial to understanding the current economic malaise. The podcast explores how Britain's government spending and debt levels have ballooned to their highest proportions since World War II, with nearly half of the UK's GDP accounted for by public expenditure. Daniel views such expansive government involvement in the economy as problematic, equating it to late-stage government spending, fueled by debt servicing that crowds out productive investments in education, infrastructure, or innovation. Drawing an analogy to personal finances, he argues that high government debt creates mounting interest payments that consume a larger share of national income without reducing the principal, burdening future generations indefinitely. Unlike households that eventually go bankrupt, countries sustain debt by growing their populations or inflating currency, but this leads to slower economic growth, rising poverty, and widening inequality. Daniel contrasts this with the principle of economic freedom, where individuals have autonomy over how they spend money, create businesses, and make investment decisions, supported by rule of law and fair regulations. The UK's steady decline in economic freedom over the last 2 decades correlates strongly with rising poverty rates and reduced entrepreneurial vibrancy. He underscores that countries with smaller governments and higher economic freedom indexes tend to have greater wealth and lower unemployment, while bigger governments paradoxically generate more poverty through misallocation and cronyism. A central point of contention revolves around the concept of wealth taxes, currently under discussion in Britain's political discourse. Daniel argues that wealth taxes, particularly those based on unrealized asset valuations on businesses or property, are economically destructive. These taxes can amount to mandatory payments on paper valuations rather than actual liquidity, forcing business owners to either sell assets or relocate to friendlier tax regimes. The podcast highlights real consequences seen historically when such taxes were implemented in Nordic countries, leading iconic British musicians and entrepreneurs to relocate their assets abroad, costing the UK both tax revenue and cultural capital. Further, wealth taxes tend to depress asset values, making them attractive acquisition targets for foreign private equity firms, which in turn accelerates the transfer of national wealth out of domestic hands into global financial conglomerates. Daniel gives an example from his own experience where a business partnership and planned investment would trigger wealth taxes on valuations far exceeding the actual invested capital, creating untenable financial burdens and dissuading future investments. This underscores how such taxation destabilizes entrepreneurial ecosystems. Beyond economic policy, Daniel addresses socio-cultural issues in Britain that exacerbate economic decline. There is growing dependency on welfare benefits, with data suggesting a large portion of the population receives more in government aid than they pay in taxes. This dynamic, combined with a mindset that frames success as something to resent rather than aspire to, fosters a culture of victimhood rather than agency. He observes that in an environment where generational dependency on benefits is prevalent, social mobility becomes stagnant. Entrenched entitlement, combined with a narrative blaming external factors for personal circumstances, restricts the drive to take initiative or start businesses. Entrepreneurs, by contrast, tend to have high agency, a desire for autonomy, and a willingness to embrace risks and delayed gratification. Daniel also shares his work with ex-offenders, where introducing entrepreneurial thinking revitalizes motivation and energy, demonstrating that mindset shifts can unlock potential even in the most adverse situations. He encourages people to leverage the unique opportunities today's technology and global connectivity offer, asserting that starting a profitable business from scratch in the modern world is more attainable than ever before. A final critical observation relates to Britain's education system, which Daniel critiques as outdated and misaligned with the demands of our fast-changing technological economy. The current model, designed for the industrial era, prepares students for jobs and roles that are rapidly disappearing due to automation and AI. Daniel advocates urgent reform to prepare children for the economic realities of the future, emphasizing creativity, adaptability, and entrepreneurial skills over rote learning and outdated curricula. This educational overhaul is necessary to sustain long-term economic vitality and equip the next generation with the tools to thrive in a globally competitive environment.